Hi, my name is Riley Herrick, and today I'm so excited to share with you my professional learning journey throughout the Masters of Education program at Georgia College. Shortly, in just a few minutes, you will learn how this experience has shaped me as an educator. My professional learning plan is focused on a question that is very meaningful to me as I begin to prepare my teaching career at Carmel Elementary as a third grade teacher. What strategies are most effective in supporting elementary students' ability to regulate their behaviors while promoting academic engagement and positive classroom environments? Throughout this presentation, I will also discuss my experiences in the program and how they have influenced and deepened my education. I will also discuss the implications of my research and how I plan to apply what I have learned in my future classroom. Completing my master's has changed the way I think about teaching. Before this program, I often thought about teaching primarily in the terms of planning lessons, delivering instruction, assessments, and what a classroom felt like. Although those are all important, I also have developed a much broader understanding of what it means to be an effective educator. My pedagogical knowledge has grown because I have learned to connect these theories to childhood development, educational research, classroom practice, and I now understand how what happens academically cannot be separated from the student's social emotional development, relationships, and a sense of belonging. I also have developed a practical teaching skill that I can immediately apply in my classroom, including classroom management, creating predictable routines, engaging students in learning, and supporting students as they develop their self regulation skills. Most importantly, I also have developed professional dispositions that I believe will shape my career as a teacher. I now see myself as not just a teacher, but also a researcher. A researcher who should continually ask the questions, examine evidence, and make informed decisions rather than simply relying on what I have always heard, seen, or done. One of the most important changes I have experienced during this program is my understanding of the role of a teacher turned into a researcher. I have learned that research is not just something that only happens in universities and at large formats. Teachers are constantly encountering questions and challenges in the classroom. The difference is whether we simply react to those challenges or whether we want to intentionally investigate them. My professional learning plan has allowed me to practice this process. I began with a question about behavior regulation. I gathered the information through observations, student perspectives, surveys, reflection, and more research. And then I used those findings to develop an understanding that I can inform with my future practice. This has changed the way I question things. I ask myself as a teacher, instead of saying, "What do I do when a student behaves this way?" I ask myself, "What is this behavior trying to communicate? What is the research trying to tell me? What strategies can I use to teach the student intentionally? And how will I know whether those strategies are going to be effective?" That shift of changing the way I think has simply helped me to respond to my students, and it's been one of the most valuable skills I carry, and I will use that in the future. This question has become a focus of mine because I believe behavior regulation is directly connected to the student's ability to learn. Students cannot always separate their academic experiences, especially at this young of an age, from their emotions and behaviors. When students are frustrated and overwhelmed, or even unsure of what is expected of them, their ability to engage in learning can also be affected. My goal was to not find ways to simply stop these inappropriate behaviors, but instead I wanted to understand how teachers can proactively create their environments that help the students to develop skills they need in order to regulate their emotions, make responsible choices, and remain engaged in learning. This perspective has become important to me through my investigation. Rather than viewing behavior management as something that happens after a problem occurs, I began to view it as something that teachers intentionally need to build into their classrooms. Through their relationships, routines, instruction, and positive supports, I believe that this can happen. This investigation has led me to three major understandings. First, students learn their best when they feel safe, respected, and supported through their positive relationships with their teachers. Second, structure. Clear expectations, respectful behaviors, consistent routines, and a structured environment where students can focus, engage, and succeed. Finally, intentionality. Intentional instruction, specific feedback, and positive reinforcement builds self regulation in their students and it builds their confidence and responsibility to grow in the classroom. Although these are three separate understandings, I have come to realize that they are deeply connected. Relationships create the foundation. Structure provides the students with predictability and security. And intentional instruction gives students the tools they need to become more independent. Together, these practices can move classroom management away from simply reacting to behaviors, and towards proactively teaching students how to be successful. My first major understanding is relationships come first. Students learn the best when they feel safe, respected, and supported through their positive relationships with their teachers. Throughout my investigation, I quickly learned that relationships influence much more whether than a student likes their teacher or not. When students trust their teacher, they are also more willing to ask for help, take risks, and persevere through those challenges. One of the strongest examples I have came from my student interviews. When I asked the student something a teacher did in the past that made them feel safe or cared for, the student explained, "I really liked when they just came over and whispered the rule instead of saying it really loud and making everyone look at me." This example stood out to me because it demonstrated how the teacher responded and it protected the student's self esteem while also still maintaining those expectations. The teacher didn't ignore the behavior, but instead the teacher responded respectfully and privately. As a future teacher, I want to implement this as well. I want my students to know that I can hold them to high expectations, but I also can still respect them as an individual. My second understanding is structure creates security. When students have clear expectations and consistent routines, it helps to create a structured environment where students can focus, engage, and succeed. This understanding has a direct impact for me as a first year third grade teacher. I want to establish expectations from the first day of school rather than waiting for the problem to occur. One example is that I want a transition routine when the students switch between my class and my other teacher's room. Students will pack up their belongings, push in their chairs, and wait quietly beside their table until their table is called to the door. The important part of this routine is I can simply not ask the students to do this one time and expect them to remember. I need to explicitly teach it as a routine, model it, and allow the students to practice and reinforce this consistently. This also connects to the NACCE Code of Ethics because it creates a safe, respectful, and developmentally appropriate environment that is part of our professional responsibility. This also My third understanding is intentional instruction. Students need specific feedback and positive reinforcement in order to help develop a confidence, responsibility, and self regulation. Students are not automatically born knowing how to manage their frustration and respond to disappointment or even navigate challenging situations. These are skills that must be intentionally taught and practiced. In my investigation, students discussed strategies such as deep breathing, counting, taking a break, walking away when they needed to calm down, and one student even explained, "Walking away and taking a break is the method I just used to calm myself down." What I found out was that it's important to use these strategies not just because the students know how to use them, but they needed the opportunity to actually practice with the supportive environment. This means that as a teacher, I need to teach self regulation in the same way that I teach academics. I need to model the strategies, give students the opportunity to practice, and reinforce them when the students are using those strategies successfully. This also aligns with Casil's emphasis on teaching self management and responsible decision making as skills that support students' academic performance, well being, and relationships. These findings have a significant implication for me as a teacher, especially as I enter my first year in my own classroom. I want to approach classroom management proactively. This means I will not wait for the students to demonstrate challenging behaviors before I teach them how to respond appropriately. I will intentionally build my relationships with my students so they know that they are valued. I will explicitly teach, model, and practice classroom routines. I want to teach self regulation strategies and provide students with opportunities to use them. I also want to be intentional about the language I use when I'm responding to behaviors. Instead of immediately asking, "Why are you doing that?" I want to consider what the student needs and what skill I need to help them to develop better. Ultimately, my goal is to create a classroom where students understand that expectations are important, but they also understand that mistakes are opportunities to learn and grow. My research has also gone beyond my individual classroom. It has helped me to understand that I have a responsibility to advocate for practices that I should support the whole child. I want to advocate for behavior support that teaches students skills rather than primarily relying on punishment or exclusion. I believe students need opportunities to learn how to regulate their emotions, solve problems, and manage responsible decisions. As a teacher, I can advocate by sharing research-based strategies with my colleagues, collaborating with support staff, communicating with their families, and contributing to conversations about school-wide behavior practices. I also want to recognize that families are an important part of this process. Students benefit when the adults in their lives communicate and work together to support their child's development. My advocacy will begin in the classroom, but I hope that it will extend beyond just my classroom and go to my grade level team, my school, and eventually even broader in the world of education. One of the biggest ways I have grown throughout this program is my development as an architect of change. I now understand that creating change doesn't always mean making a huge change across an entire school or school system. Change can now begin with noticing the need, asking a question, and investigating that question intentionally. My professional learning plan gave me the opportunity to practice this process. I noticed a need related to student behavior regulation. I investigated the question through observations, student perspectives, professional research, and reflection. I developed an understanding from that investigation and now can use those understandings in my future teachings. As I continue my career, I want to follow this cycle. I want to notice, investigate, implement, reflect, and share. I believe that this is what it means to be an architect of change. To notice something that's not simply how to accept the challenges as they are, but who uses them as knowledge, collaboration, and evidence to create a better outcome for our students. The expected impact of my investigation extends way beyond my classroom. For my students, I hope these practices will create classrooms where they feel safe, confident, engaged, and increase their independence. For their families, I hope to build stronger relationships, partnerships, and communicating their students' strengths, needs, and working together to support their development. For my colleagues, I hope to contribute to a collaborative conversation about proactive classroom management and self regulation skills. At a school level, I hope to advocate for the approaches to the behaviors that students take that are inclusive, focused on teaching strategies, and the skills they need in order to succeed. For the profession, I ultimately hope to contribute to a broader shift in how us as educators view behavior. Instead of seeing behavior as something to manage or to correct, I want to promote the idea that behavior regulation can be an important skill and also can be intentionally taught, practiced, and supported every day. This is where I see the greatest potential for change. My role as a teacher researcher does not end here. In fact, this has given me a whole new set of questions that I really want to explore. I want to know how students' self regulation skills change over time and how I can see them from start to finish once I'm in my own classroom. I also want to explore how teachers and families can work together and use the skills that we teach them at home and in school. I also want to know how schools can create consistent, proactive approaches that their behavior regulations so that their students are able to experience similar expectations across different classrooms and not just mine. These questions consistently remind me that professional learning is an ongoing process. As I reflect on my Master's of Education journey, I've come to understand that effective behavior regulation is much more than classroom management. It's about creating relationships where the students feel valued. It's about providing a structure that helps the students feel safe and secure. It's about teaching students intentionally the skills that they need in order to manage their emotions, make decisions, and become independent learners. My research has changed the way I think about my role as a teacher. I'm not just responsible for creating their academic content. I'm responsible for creating an environment where the students feel supported and have the skills they need in order to be successful. Moving forward, I want to continue to grow as a teacher, a researcher, an advocate, and a leader. I want to use what I have learned in the past 14 months and in my undergrad to guide my decision and reflect on my practice, collaborate with others, and advocate for students that support the whole child. Ultimately, my goal is not to just manage the students' behavior. My goal is to teach my students the skills they need in order to thrive. Thank you so much for your guidance and support over the past few years. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this presentation.